good afternoon, everyone. I'm Beth Ann Gerstein, and I'm the Executive Director of AMOCA. I'm going to ask that everyone mute their sound while we're doing the presentation to cut down on the background noise. Thank you. I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker today, Grayson Fair. Grayson is finishing up his artist residency at AMOCA. And for those of you who don't know, AMOCA's Artist in Residency program was established in 2012 and is one of the few long-term residency opportunities for ceramic artists on the West Coast. These residencies provide artists an opportunity to produce or develop a new body of work and receive support with housing, firing, materials, studio, and a cash stipend. Residents are selected based on their quality and artistic merit of their work and the strength of their residency plan. This program is funded through generous support from Julianne and David Armstrong, Laguna Clay, and the Wingate Foundation. So thank you to all of our supporters for this program. Grayson Fair attended the University of North Texas and received his Bachelor of Fine Arts in 2016. He studied sculpture, drawing, fiber, and majored in ceramics. In 2018, he spent a year as an artist in residence at the Taos Clay Studio in New Mexico. And in 2019, he moved to Arizona for a year-long residency at the famous Wrights Ranch. His early work was focused on functional pottery, and now his work is focused on non-objective, action-based sculpture that is wood-fired. I'll let Grayson share more about that. Please join me in welcoming Grayson Fair.
Well, thank you, Beth Ann. That was a lovely introduction. Hello, everybody. I'm Grayson. So today I'm going to be sharing a bit about my past, how I got where I am today, as well as what I'm working on in the studio currently. So I've got a little PowerPoint for you, and I'll go ahead and cue that up. So here we go. All right, everyone can see that, hopefully. That's my name, Grayson Fair. Okay, so the first slide here, we've got a picture of my brother and I. This is a horrendous and yet beautiful photograph of my older brother holding me in a creek bed. I wanted to include this just to kind of start it off light. I think it's kind of a hilarious photograph, as well as just to show you sort of my mentor through life is my older brother. He's the one that convinced me to be an artist. Thanks, bro. Love you a lot. Hope you're watching. I don't think he is, but anyway. Okay, so I went to school in Denton, Texas, which is in North Texas. Great little college town. This is the town square. I just wanted to show you a little snippet. Really loved that town, and I miss it dearly. In college, I worked on a series of functional pots. I was always trying to get just as utilitarian as I possibly could. This pot here on the left is a coffee server, so you could brew your coffee pot in it and then serve yourself coffee. On the right, I had this sort of other series going constantly of I was always finding my scraps on the side of the wheel or the failed pots. I always found them a little more interesting, a little more artful. So I've been sort of dropping pots and letting them go for years. And so I wanted to include both of these. These are in the same glaze, same format. They were even in the same show together. From there, I wanted to include this is my thesis show I had with another artist, Given McClure. It was called Communion, and it was a pretty good show, I think. It was a fusion of pottery as well as sculpture, and you can see some of the wall hangings in the back. I was already sort of flattening clay and hanging it and displaying it on the wall. After college, I was working at a little community studio, and I met this man, and he was asking me if I knew anybody that was interested in horticulture and wanted to come live on his ranch and do pottery. I was like, yeah, I know somebody. That's me. So here's a picture of me and my dog down by the lakefront, and we had a little campfire, and we'd go fishing down there and catch catfish all the time. And one day I was walking through the woods at the ranch, and I saw a little crack in the ground where the ground had separated. And I had done some research on native clays, and I knew that was a sign that there was clay there. I went and got a hoe, a little pickaxe, and started digging, and I found this lovely golden brown clay, which turned out to be a high fire stoneware. From this clay, so many things happened for me. I was really interested in materials, learning about the clay itself, but in the process of reclaiming it, I came up with all these other ideas. So when you are processing native clays, the first step is to dig it, and then you dry it out, you slake it down, which means adding moisture, creating a slurry from it. And from that slurry, I started doing these series I was pouring slip, liquid clay, into these circles, and I would do it once on the hour every day, or for a full day I would pour little circles, and it wasn't ever really working out. It never came to fruition as a final piece, but I think this image is really strong, and I think that it sort of inspired a lot of work to come. From there, I started extruding the clay in a more viscous state and building these. People referred to them as bird's nest or vermicelli. I preferred the term spaghetti castle, or slipstack is the professional term. But this work was really fun. It was sort of building up layers and layers. And the things I was talking about were these sort of seemingly incidental interactions that we sort of have every day of our life that sort of build us up as a person and create a whole out of just these little things. Like, for instance, I went to a community studio one day and just sort of was like, yeah, I'll sign up. And then I met this man, and then he took me to his ranch, and then I ended up living there and digging clay, and then I made this series of work. And then this work was actually sort of a departure from pottery as well. I started focusing more on this work. At the time, I was also working in a foundry, and I was just doing the most backbreaking work. But after a time, I decided to quit my job and focus fully on this work, which got me my first residency in Taos. But from here, it was getting sort of these sort of sculptural vessel forms. One of the problems that I was encountering with them is that they were so fragile that they were near impossible to sell effectively. I mean, I could sell them, but they would rarely get to their destination in one piece. So they became more just artful objects, better for photographs than anything. They were also, some of them were wood-fired, which lended to this sort of interesting and composite or sort of earth tones. And this piece was really strong, but again, very, very fragile and near impossible to ship and sell. And from there, I decided to go even more fragile. And this piece was just done into a bowl. And again, it was sort of about these buildup of interactions, but also how fragile they can be. And then this piece was a really strong piece. This is actually belongs to a good friend of mine. And this is basically drawn clay and then presented about a 1/4 inch off the wall and with harsh lights on it, which gives it these really lovely cast shadows. But this was definitely like a combination of sort of working in the moment as well as like these contour line drawings that I've always done. But I thought this piece was really strong, but again, it was proved really hard to market and sell. From there, I started working back into the taller sculptural vessel forms, and a friend presented a solution to it of firing them onto kiln shelves. And so I was able to fire this work onto kiln shelves and then mount them on the wall, and they became this whole other thing. Instead of like an object on the table that refers to a pot, this became a total work of art, I believe. And it had this sort of void that brought you into it. And I thought this was a really strong version of this work. And this is about, I think this piece was about 18 by 18, with maybe 9-inch lift off the wall. So it was getting bigger. So from this work, I was able to develop a strong portfolio with a certain style. Before I had submitted to a bunch of residencies and had no luck because I sort of had a bunch of different things going on. But once I focused on this work, I was able to put together a strong portfolio, and I was accepted to a residency in the Taos Clay Studio in Taos, New Mexico, which, if you've never heard of Taos, it's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. This is a view from the mesa facing the Taos Mountain here, and I think behind this photograph there's the gorge, which is a large canyon that goes through the city, and it's really strikingly beautiful place. Let's see what we got next. So when I went to Taos, I was surrounded by a lot of potters. We also had a gallery at the front of the studio where we sold mostly functional pots, and so I kind of got back into this pot making. I was making these lovely little cups, these little whiskey sippers or tea bowls, and this one was fired in a large onigama wood-fired kiln in the back section of it, in the charcoal chamber. So at peak temperature, we dumped all this charcoal into the kiln, and it sort of created these dark, rich blue and red tones. And this is one of the best pots I believe I've ever made, followed up shortly by this little cup here. That was in the same kiln in a different section. And again, I was really focused on like how to make the best cup, like as far as use goes, but then also like I really was trying to develop a style and a surface. But my time in Taos, I also got away from pots. I started sort of prioritizing other work. And I was making these forms, which if you've seen my current work, you can see a little bit of the influence here. And I made it, 50 to 100 of these, and they're all like kind of similar, but this is probably the only one that I would ever show in a photograph because they were all pretty ugly. But it's like you learn and you get better. But this had good proportions. It does read as another object. Often people joke about it, but I think as like a sort of vessel form, it was really strong. And from here, I sort of started working with tubes and sort of capturing these moments, these actions of dropping and stretching. And these two pieces, I've got this piece and then the next one as well. These are definitely about, in reference to that first photo, these are about sort of growing up with my older brother and about, that sort of guidance that I was provided as a younger brother, having a really cool older brother, always knowing like what to do and what was cool and like, and so this what these pieces are about. This photo's not great, but you can see this sort of same sort of quality to both of these, but different clays and different surface, so they had different movements to them, but in each piece, one is shorter than the other, sort of representing my older brother. And here I am setting up a show in Taos. My final show was called Something Playful, because the way I sort of treat clay, I try not to be too serious with it, and I am inspired by the material constantly, and I like to go into the studio, and the way I figure things out is through play. I just throw clay around and figure it out. The piece on the left was part of this totem series, so it was sort of referenced back to that sort of slip stacked, the sort of conglomerate, for lack of a better word, we called these spaghetti pieces. And they were strong, and I think they were good work, but they weren't in the same vein that I like to make. They were very tedious, time-consuming, and their forms were very intentional, whereas I like to take some of the intention out of clay and let the material speak for itself. Not to say that these pieces weren't strong, they were just not what I was interested in continuing. After this show, I had a couple different options, but I ended up accepting a residency in Arizona at the Wrights Ranch, which I had never been to Arizona before I visited the ranch. I had no idea how beautiful it was. I mean, strikingly beautiful. I mean, you've got the red rocks, you've got the desert, you've got lush forests, and you got rivers, and I was really blown away, and I was really moved by the geography and the landscape of Arizona. And so this is a shot from the kiln pad at the Wrights Ranch, looking out over the river, to the train tracks where a train would go past every day. We'd always wave. There was a running joke that whenever Don Wrights was firing the kiln, anytime a train went past, he would stoke the kiln, whether or not it needed to be stoked. He would throw a bunch of wood in so that the train would see all the smoke pouring out. And so we continued that tradition. Every time a train went past, we were, stoke the kiln. So that was just a good time out there. My time at the ranch, I really leaned into the extrusions. I was making a lot of tube work. So an extruder is a tool that you load clay into and then you press it down and you can have different dies where different shapes come out. But I was basically working with cylinders for the most part, and exploring. I was still working within this sort of vessel realm where this is definitely like a reference to a vase. And I think you could put flowers in it. It didn't necessarily need flowers, but it was definitely like still in this realm of functional pots. But as I continued to work, I was trying to get away from that, but still working with the same tools that I had before. So I was taking those tubes and trying to present them in a way that was taking the pottery out of it. So this is a wall piece, and it was sort of leaning into what I'm talking about now, about a moment, about a time and action, and you can see exactly what it was done, and it's whereas some parts of the process may be meticulous, like the making of the tubes, the actual forming of the piece happened within a minute, you know, so it was very much an instant, a snippet of a time. I was concerning with other wall hanging pieces. This piece I don't think is quite as strong as some of the others, but I think it's a good representation of what I was doing at the time. Trying to capture the movement, and I think this piece did that well. It had a lot of movement, and had a lot of energy while still being contained into a small piece. And from there, I was still making some of these. This would be like an ikebana or like a bud vase sort of thing, but more of like a sculptural object, but people still like wanted to put flowers in it, which is okay with me. But again, I was trying to get away from that. But I made maybe hundreds of these, and this is the only one that I would use in a portfolio because the proportions on this one I think were just nailed from top to bottom. And it's little. It's it's maybe 8 inches tall. But I had been making these in Taos, the larger ones that I had showed before, the ones about the brothers, and the proportions were always kind of lanky and they never quite felt very good. But once I scaled them down, I was able to sort of figure out the proportions that I wanted and nail the form. And this piece is wood fired, and you can see this sort of drastic difference between one side to the other. That's one of my favorite little pieces I made at the ranch. And from there, I was trying to take that same technique of taking tubes and building and turning it into a more sculptural object. And this piece is probably 3.5 feet tall. And it's a conglomerate of all these tubes stacked on each other. And this piece was sort of about the futility of clay. I mean, I had made a bunch of these and they all failed. And so I was really making this piece expecting it to fail. And releasing a lot of my anger and my frustrations into it. And I was able to actually successfully achieve that, I think. And this piece, I still have this piece actually. And from there, I started working with slabs. So I started taking thin slabs and affecting them and stretching them and bending them. And I think it fit into the same realm of work, but it was definitely a transitional point. And this was within the last couple months of my residency there. I sort of discovered this new technique of moving clay. And these works were soda fired, which is another atmospheric type of firing. And some of them are very fabric-like. They're also very bodily in some ways. They reference the human form a little bit. And this piece here. So they're reading, I think they're in line with the tube work. They're very similar to the tubes, but they have just a little like looser quality to them, which I really enjoyed. And I think I really wanted to lean into that and embrace that gestural quality of them. And these pieces were part of the Moment series, which has become how I work. And as my work has evolved, so has my artist statement. And what I talk about with these pieces is this preservation of a moment. So I'm making a slab, and then I may spend 5 or 10 minutes doing that, but the piece itself is made very quickly. And each one is different. It's almost impossible to recreate each piece. I can do them in certain styles, or I can fire them with certain surfaces, but each one is unique. And I think it's a good representation of what it means to make in the studio, and how each day is different, and each day you may be frustrated, you may be happy, you may be sad, and the piece is able to record those moments. And so I believe that this series sort of really launched into what I'm working towards now. Here's a great little photo of the ranch. You can see some of the Don Wright's pieces in the foreground, and then the mountains in the background. It was a really lovely, lovely place, setting out there. From there, I was accepted as the resident at Amoka. This is where I am now, in lovely downtown Pomona, which has really grown on me. I love this little town. Great energy here. I moved during the pandemic, so it was very quiet at first, and a hard transition for sure to move to a new place during the pandemic, hard to meet people. But luckily there's such a strong support group in the studio here that I was able to make friends and connections here. And now that, you know, as the pandemic has its ups and downs, as we have known, I've been able to meet friends and have some fun in Pomona. It's been really great. So I'm going to show some of the work that I'm doing now, or this is the work that I started when I was here. So it was a continuation of that Moment series. And these were soda-fired works. So we've spent a lot of time firing the soda kiln here and working on this atmospheric flashing. So the surface on this piece is one slip on it, but as the kiln is fired and the soda ash is sprayed into the kiln, you get these drastic different effects. So we've been sort of dialing that kiln in and been getting some really good results from it. And this series, I was really enjoying making this series, but I wanted to push it further and I wanted to create sculptural objects. These are all wall hangings, and I wanted to take them further and create sculptural freestanding objects. This is in that same realm. This is a wall hanging here, and this is a wood-fired one. This was in the bottom of a coal bed here, so it was buried in coals for a couple of days and left it with these lovely dark gray, rough tones. The picture doesn't quite do the surface justice. But from here, I took these same techniques, these same forms, and I started to stretch them and bend them and turn them into these freestanding sculptures. And these fit into the same realm of the moments where they're, but I think they even personified it even more because they have this certain figurative quality to them. It's like, it's almost like, I'm having a hard time like not dancing when I'm describing them because they feel very like, you know, they're very much about movement and about, and you can see how it was done a little bit. You know, you may not know exactly how it was done, but you can see that it was dropped, it was smashed, it was pushed, and that's really important to me that some of the process is evident. And from here, we did some others. So same sort of technique, creating these ripples, stretching, folding, bending. This piece is actually really special to me because it's in reference back to the native clay. So when I was in Texas 4 years ago, I was digging that golden brown and some red clay, and I had a stash of it, a bucket of it, and a peer of mine, Andrew Smith, helped me make it into a lovely flashing slip. So the clay on its own is this dark red that you can see on the bottom of the piece. But as it goes into an atmospheric kiln, it will flash this lovely yellow to gray. So this piece is a little ode to Texas here. It's the Texas native slip, but made and fired in California. And some other pieces, again, you can see the direct translation from the wall work into a sculptural object here. And this is one of the pieces I took to a wood firing. I actually went back to Arizona to go fire one of the wood kilns out there. And I feel like this is one of the stronger pieces. The color on it, I had a wide range of color, and sort of the atmosphere affected on it was this, you know, the gray, but then I had these deep reds in the recesses. And it was a really strong piece, I think. Another piece from that firing. So this piece was buried up against a bed of coals for a couple of days. So that means that part of the top of the piece, you can see these sort of gray tones with these yellows coming down them. That's wood ash that's melted, but then down on the bottom you can see this sort of crusty under the sea look, and that's from unmelted ash, and that's crust. And once it comes out of the kiln, it looks horrendous. It looks terrible. It's like all just like rough and gross, but then once you start to clean it up and add water and scrub it, you get these really lovely tones that become revealed. Another one from the series, I think as I was making them, I started to figure out what I like to see a little bit more and what I wanted to preserve. If you look at the top of this piece, you can see that those ripples kind of fold over. And I was preserving that, which was really important to me, and to see all of those moments there. This piece, made in a similar vein, wood-fired as well. I actually had someone tell me that this piece reminded them of the Virgin Mary, which I think is great. I don't see it, but that's one of my favorite things about art is that people are always like, oh, this reminds me of this. And it used to be annoying, but now I think it's hilarious and great. But yeah, so this one's titled The Virgin Mary. and I think it's a pretty strong piece. It actually fell over during the firing, but somehow survived. So a lot of my work is about sort of this mitigation of loss. With ceramics, it's just so prone to failure, and you have to become acceptant. You have to accept the potential failure, and you have to learn to live with it. And so sometimes they fail, but they still work out. So this piece was one of those. And from here, I have started this black and white series. So this is done on porcelain with a black underglaze over it and removed through, sort of scratched through the black slip. And I think these have such great movement to them. I think these are really strong pieces. It's kind of funny, a lot of times, I work really hard and fire these kilns for so long, and then I end up finding like a really simple way to do something that's much more effective, and people are responding to it a lot more. So whereas this work is simpler to do, it has become more advanced as far as just visually appealing, I think. And I wish I could zoom in a bit, because there's some really great moments happening there where these lines blend. And I think from here, I'm going to show you, these are sort of in progress pics from now. So that was sort of the last of my portfolio, and now this is works from my studio that I'm working on currently. So I've been doing a lot of the black and white series. They're sort of fun, and they are like pretty much instantly gratifying, because as soon as I make them, it's like, wow, they look great. And this picture is a little blurry. I apologize for that. And this has been on the forefront of my mind here. These pieces are about 32 inches long, and they haven't been fired yet, so we don't know if they're going to make it, but they're on kiln shelves, and they will exist. They'll go on the wall, and I'm going to make a few more of them, and I'm not sure how they will be displayed, but they'll definitely be displayed together, whether that's 3, 5, 7 of them. We'll see how many I can make. But this, I think, this piece is sort of about that moment, but it's defining it. Whereas before they had a live edge, this moment, these pieces are really sort of, I'm cutting them and I'm saying, this is what's important this time here. And so I'm concerning myself with the edge too, and I think my next image is a detail of these edges butted up together. So this is something that I'm really fond of here, these sort of stops. It's this contrast of this movement of this waviness and then this harsh edge here. So I'm still figuring out how to fire and how to finish them, but I'm definitely going to be paying attention to those edges there and how they end. Yes, and from here, let's see. Oh, I've made some of those black and white series, but I've folded them up into sculptures. And so these are recently finished pieces from the kiln. And I think they're pretty successful. I think the piece on the right, with the lines going horizontally rather than vertically, is a little stronger. I think it displays some of those ripples a little better. But these are really fun and gratifying pieces here. And this is the last photo I've got. This is an in-progress piece in my studio right now. This is exactly how I left it. So I've built this large cylinder, and I'm sort of covering it in these slab pieces here. And then once it's finished, I'll slice it into pieces, and then fire the pieces separately, and then stack them up when they're done. And this is sort of a culmination of a lot of different ideas. It's hard for me to describe right now because it's not finished. A lot of times the way I work is very process oriented. I let the clay do the talking until the piece is done, and then I have to figure out what I'm going to say about it. It's very rare that I go into making with all of the language already developed. It definitely comes with the making for me. And this piece has been really therapeutic for me. I usually, from the work you've seen, it's usually like done pretty quickly, and then it's finished. I do it in one session, whereas this piece has taken over a week for me to work, and it's still not done. So it's allowed me a lot of time for reflection, and I've sort of been able to figure out a lot of stuff about myself from it. And so yeah, this is what I'm working on now, and I've got a few more pieces that I'm making. I actually have a show coming up, August 14th. The title is still to be determined. We've got a couple working titles, but I'm I'm not going to share those yet because I'm still figuring it out. But yeah, I'll be posting more about that and keep everyone updated on that. It'll be in Pomona on August 14th. It'll be a whole day event. And I think I have one more picture for you. Aww. This is Wiley Boy. This is my other half here. He's probably the best studio dog that ever existed. Here he is in a chair getting pet by Dr. John here. So if you ever want to come meet the dog, you can come to the studio and see him. You can also see my studio if you want, but I know the real star here is Wiley. Anyway, that's my presentation there. And I think Beth Ann. I have to plug something. Yes, I'm having a in-person studio visit, artist talk, and studio sale this weekend, this Saturday at 10 a.m. And that's here at Amoka in my studio. And there'll be work for sale, as well as I'll be doing a similar talk, but just in person without a screen. And I'll also be making a couple things, so you get to see a little bit more of the process of how it's done. Yep.
Great. Can we stop screen sharing on your end?
Yep. Okay.
Excellent. Well, thank you. That was great fun and great to see your most recent piece, since it was wrapped up last time I was down there. We would love to have any questions at this point. Either you can put them in the Q&A, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. Anyone? Bob, I think you have a question.
Yeah.
Dancing.
Yeah. Hi, Grayson. The tube pieces and the pieces you're doing now, the new ones, are they more unfolded slabs, or slabs that are then manipulated rather than extruded?
Yes, they're folded slabs. So I've been sort of figuring out this process, and it's quite fun, actually. I wish I would have included a video. So I make a slab, and everyone that sees me do it says, you should go into the pizza business, because I've gotten really good at making slabs. But then I take it and I just huck it. I just toss it at the wall, and then I'm able to sort of, it ripples like that, and I sort of adjust it with my hands a bit, and then I'm building it. So there's still this element of like letting go, but I'm sort of taking and adding a little bit more intention to it.
Good, good.
Yeah.
Then I guess just as a follow-up, when you fire those wall pieces, are they fired horizontally in the kiln, like on a shelf, or?
Yes, so they're on kiln shelves right now, so they'll be fired horizontally like that. Eventually, I would like to figure out ways of firing them upright, just so I could work with glaze manipulation. But for now, they're getting fired horizontally.
Okay, good.
Yeah, great question.
Bob? There's a question online that says, in your studio practice, do you have any rules?
Yes, I do like to, I do have one rule. Well, I have a couple rules, actually. One is no scraps left behind. So if I've ever got like a bunch of junk laying around on my studio table, I try to make art out of it every day. And that allows me to just play at the end of my day. And my other rule that I've sort of recently established is that if I'm not having fun, if I'm not enjoying it, I'm not going to do it. So I recently tried to revisit old ideas and was trying to make a large-scale sculpture out of these extruded tubes. And I was like, gosh, this is so boring. Like, I don't want to do this. And then I was like, you know what? I'm just not going to do it. And so I think that's a rule that I set for myself, is that just try to keep myself entertained. And if I'm not entertained, I'm just going to try not to do it.
I think you do a good job at that. And they said, great answer, thanks.
You bet.
Was it difficult to decide to incorporate the use of a kiln shelf, or was that easy?
I think it just comes with the territory of, failing a lot. I think ceramics especially is learn from your failures. And I've failed so many times. And so it was like trying to pick up work and moving on to kiln shelves, and it would just break in half. And so, I think maybe someone said, why don't you just build it on a kiln shelf? And I said, that's a good idea. But yeah, I think, having the resources to do it, having the kiln shelves to do it is very helpful. Yeah.
Someone else asked, not a clay question, but is your brother an artist?
My brother is an artist. Yeah.
What does he do?
Well, he went to Pratt University in Brooklyn, New York, and was a painting major, but was not doing painting by the end of his career. He was doing sort of more sculptural work. And then he works in the sort of architectural and interior design. His interest is mostly in furniture design. And he and I make very differently. He's very thoughtful and plans things out ahead of time, whereas I work and then sort of make plans after. So it's kind of great to have the balance with the two of us together. You know.
Must be interesting.
Yeah, it's fun. We have fun.
Any other questions?
Grayson, are you influenced by other artists, or do you look at other artists' work when you're working, or?
Yeah, definitely. One of my biggest influences is an artist named Torbjørn Kvasbo. He's Norwegian, I believe, or yeah, I think he's Norwegian. And he works in a manner that I like to, I would love to achieve, of sort of just working very physically and adding things together. I've had a lot of influences over the years, and I'm always looking at people's work, but I think at a certain point you do have to remove yourself from your influences, or else you will end up making too much of their work. And so there's definitely a balance there of looking at work, but also not constantly looking at work. So maybe I'll have like periods of time where I'm doing all the research and drawing and things like that and just trying to be inspired. But then when I'm actually trying to actualize my ideas, I try to just sort of put the blinders on and just focus on my work alone. But yeah, that's definitely a constant struggle, is trying not to make other people's work, right? It's yeah.
The balance. Yeah, the balance.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a comment.
Yes.
So, when you're first learning with clay, most of us go through you have to make a perfect cylinder, and here's how you do an exact handle for a mug. And, there's all these rules and you are exerting your power and your influence on that clay to make this exact product. And we're told, oh, get out a sketchbook and you have to sketch your ideas, and then you make those ideas. And I don't work that way. I've never been able to work that way. But I always feel this tension of I'm not doing it right, So I love that you bring such an immediacy to it, and that you kind of obviously you have an idea of what you're looking for, but you're just playing with the techniques of how to get there. And then, if you're not having fun, you're not doing it. And, for me, people look at my pieces and they say, oh, they're so playful, but they're still, I think, constrained by some of the traditional rules. So I just love your work. It's just so inspiring for me to see just the movement, the fold, just that moment in time. Like, I'm married to a geologist. And so it's sort of like, what can we learn from this moment in time, looking at this rock or something? And I don't know, I just loved it. And thank you for exploring and being playful with your craft and sharing it with us.
Well, thank you for the lovely comment. That's really nice. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think like every art form, you have to learn the rules before you break them. But I don't think that they need to follow any certain, you don't have to do it any certain way. I mean, there's no right way to do clay. I mean, there's a couple wrong ways, but there's no right way.
Another question from the chat is, do you have any thoughts on the future direction of your work?
Not really. I think right now I'm into those last two in progress pieces that I showed. The big cylinder and the wall pieces. But in the future, I am heading up to Montana, where I'll be firing a really large wood kiln. And so I think the work will sort of respond to the setting, as well as how it's being fired. And I think I'll be able to work on a larger scale in Montana, just because that kiln, I think it's about my height. So I'll be able to work on like a life-size scale. And you know, I try not to plan too much, like I said. I get kind of anxious with plans. But yeah, I think I'll just continue to make work and just be playful with it, and it'll just hopefully reveal itself when it comes. Yeah.
And a question from me is, you know, how do each of these residencies that you've been on and you continue to do, you know, how is that impacting your life and your work?
Yeah. Well, first I'll share the sort of one of the downsides of it is that, you know, I've lived in 4 different states in the last 4 years, which is, I mean, it's amazing. It's a huge perk, but also it's hard. It's hard to move, and it's hard to, you know, make friends, and hard to feel close with people when you're constantly in a new place. But that being said, I have friends all over the country now. And I've met a lot of really amazing people, a lot of really amazing makers. I have an incredible pottery collection and ceramics collection just from trades alone. I love it so much. I can't stop. Like this here mug here. One of a few of my Laura Nave mugs. But no, I think one of the biggest perks is being able to surround yourself with people with different ideas. You know, if I was still in my hometown of Frisco, Texas, I would certainly not be doing what I'm doing now. And I think just being exposed to a lot of different ideas and a lot of different techniques, and just the little conversations. People come into my studio and say, what if you did that but backwards, or turn it upside down, or that sucks, or that's really good. And I think that all just builds and builds, and it's forming into a career now, which is kind of crazy to me. I mean, I'm kind of baffled by it, but here I am, and I'm still being supported and making clay. So I'm so lucky. I know. Yeah.
Excellent. Last call for questions before we wrap it up.
That's good.
Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us, and hope you'll be able to join us for Grayson, one of Grayson's 2 upcoming events, and there'll be more information on amoka.org. So thank you all for joining us. And in the chat, Paul just placed, if you want to learn more about the Artist in Residence program, we have an upcoming application coming this fall for the next round. And you can see a brief video on the website, and you can get that in the chat. So
Great.
Thanks again for joining us, and
Thanks, everybody.
next time.
Yep. Bye-bye.